We're going to start on 12b, Lema Ketanai. Let us say that this discussion was an earlier machlekes. Okay. Thank Hashem that we're able to learn every day. So we're learning, we should have based on English immediately. So we had an interesting topic that the Gemara brought up. It was actually brought up by Rami Bar Chama. He is asking if there's two pieces of meat. One is a sacrifice that's permissible to eat. Why? Because the blood was sprinkled and its sacrifice was already offered. Now the meat is sitting there. So the meat, what happens to the meat? It's eaten. And then there's another piece of meat that's perfectly mundane meat. There's nothing holy in this meat. And he says that this meat, this mundane meat, should be like this, like the sacrifice. But does he mean that as the sacrifice was the sacrifice originally when it was prohibited, it doesn't mean like it is now when it's not prohibited? Basically, does it go back to its original status that it was a sacrifice? And over there, before the blood was sprinkled, it was prohibited. And what he just did was he took a vow. And with the vow, he had this comparison that grasps the item that he's comparing it to. And it becomes prohibited like that. The only problem is that this is already permissible. So do you go back to its original status or not? So the Gemara says, Lema Ketanai. Maybe this is a machlekes tanaim. Hariya like Bachar. Usually, Lema Ketanai is like a question. Why should they be arguing about it? Usually, it's brought in. If there's machlekes tamiraim, if Talmudic sages are arguing about something, and we think that that's possibly an argument in the Mishnah as well, which is several hundred years earlier. So we say, why should they be arguing about it later in the Talmud when it was already argued about in the Mishnah? And if they just want to choose a side, so just choose a side, but they don't have to like recreate this whole thing. So we ask it as a question. But over here, we didn't see it as a machlekes. Over here, we asked it as a question. And we said, Lema Ketanai, maybe resolving this question is by saying that it's a machlekes. That's a perfectly fine way of resolving a question. So I'm not sure if this Lema Ketanai has the problem aspect to it the way in the rest of Talmud Bavli, Lema Ketanai is a question. So it says, you see where we're holding? It's 5 lines from the bottom. Lema Ketanai, Hariya like Bachar. This is upon me, just like a firstborn animal. Okay, that's a way of taking a vow. Rabbi Yaakov says, "Oh, Eiser took a vow." Rabbi Yaakov Eiser. Rabbi Yehuda Mater. Rabbi Yehuda says, "No, it's not considered a vow." He's comparing the object that the item that he's prohibiting to a firstborn animal. Now, the rule with the firstborn animal is that it's brought as a sacrifice. So, how does someone take a vow? He compares the food to a sacrifice, which is exactly what he did. What are those other books that you have? Oh my gosh. Wow. Made for learning the laws of Shabbos, volume 1. See the size of that? Okay. A few years worth of reading. Something like that. Okay. So, hey Chidami, what's the case? We have a machlekes over here, how this works. Now, the background to why this is even a question is that the firstborn animal, when it's born, it's sanctified. When someone takes a vow and he grasps something else, matfis, he says that this item should be like that. What's that? It means something else that's prohibited. But that other thing that's prohibited has to become prohibited through a vow. So he's saying this should be like that, which means this is a vow, like that's a vow. But if that other item, the item that he's comparing it to, was prohibited without a vow, as we're going to see, someone says this is like pig, so then it doesn't become prohibited. So here is the firstborn of a something that he makes it into a sacrifice, or is it just naturally a sacrifice? So there's a background to this where it's not perfect.
Wouldn't there be a difference because the firstborn is considered a sacrifice even before it's created, and the vow is like something?
Right. That's exactly the issue. That's what's going to come up. But before we get into that, the Gemara starts off with something else. The Gemara says, "Hey Chidami, what's the case? Are we talking about that it's before the sprinkling of the blood? Well, it's a regular sacrifice. It's prohibited." Now the Ran adds in that it's not that he has to say that this item is like the Bechar before the sprinkling of the blood. Or even if he just says Stam, it's like the Bechar, then that should be enough as well. The Ran adds that in. Okay, he has a proof for it. So the Gemara asks, if that's the case, that we're talking about that it's before the sprinkling of the blood, what's the difference before the sprinkling of the blood or after? Before the sprinkling of the blood, the sacrifice is prohibited to be eaten. So now when he's comparing this item to the firstborn, it should be prohibited to be eaten. So my time of demand the shari, then what would be the reason for Rabbi Yehuda that says that it's permissible? Rabbi Yaakov said it's prohibited, not the firstborn, the item that's compared to the firstborn. And what Rabbi Yehuda says is permissible. Why should it be permissible? He compared it to a sacrifice. And if it's after the sprinkling of the blood, so my time of the mandasa, then why would anyone say that it's prohibited? Because after the sprinkling of the blood, the firstborn animal is eaten.
What exactly would change if he declares something to be as if it's the firstborn? In either case, if it's the firstborn or not a firstborn, if he consecrates it as a carbon, he's still not going to eat it before the blood is.
Right. What we're saying now is that he has a loaf of bread. He says this loaf of bread should be prohibited to me like a firstborn sacrifice. Now we're asking, what do you mean by the firstborn sacrifice? Do you mean before the blood was sprinkled or after? Because after the blood sprinkled, then he's allowed to eat it.
Aren't there restrictions even after Zrika? Also, it can be master women wear.
Yeah. There was a discussion about that.
There's still some kind of restriction.
Right. The Ran
You're talking about the
said, but a Tame can eat it. But there's Chazeh and Shaykh.
It's not like saying you can buy it public.
So the Ran asked that question on the bottom of Yud Aleph. Naftali is asking a question for those online. Asking a question that even if it's going to be like the firstborn after the blood was sprinkled, which we're making it look like it's perfectly permitted, it's actually not perfectly permitted. It can only be eaten by someone that's pure, and there's limitations on that. So he's just restricted it now. So the Ran over here says that those restrictions don't come from his vow. Those restrictions come milmaila. He took a vow.
Same with it before.
No
issues when it's born.
Oh, but that's going to come up soon. That's going to come up soon. But when we asked before, he was when Rami Bar Chama asked the question that this should be like the meat of a shlamim. So is it after it's sprinkled or before it's sprinkled? And this, and he puts it together. Do we say as it was originally or as it is now? So in that situation, he said, but 1 second, there's restrictions on that. He asked your question. He says, yeah, but those come from above. Those aren't his vows. Okay. Elalav. So it can't be that it's before the sprinkling. It can't be that it's after the sprinkling, because then we can't get a machlekes out of this. It has to be a machlekes. Elalav. The machis basar bechar umachis basar dehaich gabe. He places the flesh of the bechar. He places the flesh of the item, the flesh of the thing that he's taking the vow. I said it was a loaf of bread. Doesn't matter. Here it's meat. He says this should be like this. And that was exactly Rami Bar Chama's question. Do we say that we look at it as it was originally, that it was a firstborn animal, it was a sacrifice? Or do we say that, one second, now it's permissible? Do we look at it as it is now, or as it was? Follow? The Gemara says, and v'tanaihi. And now we have a machlekes tanaim, so it's exactly what we were looking for. How do you answer a question? Say it's a machlekes. That's I tell my students on the Gemara test. But if you write it's a machlekes, you're probably right.
99%.
Yeah. Yeah, in your smicha, you're 99.9. Everything's a machlekes, except for one chapter, that we say in the morning, is El Makaiman. It's the only chapter of Mishnayos that doesn't have a machlekes. Yeah, it could be that's one of the reasons why we say it. I mean, we're saying it because of the sacrifices, but that's you notice there's no machlekes in the whole chapter. Yeah. Okay. The Gemara says, "Loi." That's not what's going on here. The Kuli Alma, everyone agrees. We're dealing with that it was before the blood was sprinkled. My time of demand the shari. So why should anyone hold? Rabbi Yehuda held that it was permissible. This flesh. Why should it be permissible? He took a regular neder. Gemara says, Amakra, this is not a regular neder because the pasuk says, Ki yidar at sheyida b'davar another. He has to vow in something that was prohibited because of a vow. Okay, this excludes Bechar, the davar asur. Bechar was born like that. When it's born, he didn't make it into a Bechar. It was a Bechar. He didn't even have to consecrate it. It was automatically consecrated. And when it was born, it was holy. So, Amanda Asar. So then why would anyone say that it's prohibited? Pretty clear, no? This is not a vow because it was born like that. Well, Amakra la Hashem la Rabbi Stavar Asar. Now, this makes it look, it says, the pasuk says, Kiyidar neder la Hashem. This is coming to include this extra word, la Hashem, is coming to include something that was prohibited by Hashem. In other words, it wasn't made prohibited by a vow. It makes it look like a general statement, but I don't think it really is a general statement. When we go on, it's going to clarify itself. Manda Asar, the one that says that it was, Amanda Shari, the one that says that it's permissible. So La Hashem Ayavadle, what does he do with the extra word? He says that a person can say that this loaf of bread or this piece of meat should be prohibited to me, just like a sin offering or a guilt offering. Now, the sin offering or guilt offering is obligated to bring. So the Gemara says, well, what made you think that it should work by a chatas and an asham and not by the firstborn? It says, well, the difference is clear. A chatas vasham, even though he's obligated to bring it, it's an obligation. But he was the one that decided which animal it should be. He chose the animal and he consecrated the animal to be the chatas, to be the asham. So when he takes a vow and he says this should be like that, so he's actually comparing it to something that he was able to compare it to, which is another thing that was vowed or dedicated. On the other hand, the firstborn, that is holy from the womb, right when it's born, it's holy.
What do you mean that chatas is compared to something that's already?
So what he does when he takes a vow is he says this food should be prohibited just like this sacrifice. That's the original vow. So
Oh,
which
I thought he said
sacrifice?
Maybe you might say this is prohibited to me as a chatos.
Right, but he could choose which sacrifice he wants to compare it to. So he can choose it's a chatas, he can choose an asham. What if he chooses a bechar, a firstborn? So that's a machlekes.
I mean, let's say he doesn't have anything to compare it to, and he wants to make that a chatas.
Oh, so then he would just dedicate it as a chatas.
Okay.
If he wants to not make it a chatas, because he's not dealing with an animal, let's say it's a loaf of bread or a cup of coffee,
All right.
he wants to say that it's prohibited. So he compares it to a chatas. He doesn't actually need the chatas in front of him.
Okay.
You could just say this should be prohibited, just like a chatas. Okay. Okay, you see the size of those books.
You'll find some numbers to call.
So now we have a little bit of a problem, because why would anyone say that it's prohibited if a firstborn was consecrated, not consecrated, was sanctified when it was born? No one had to do anything.
Why would we do that?
So why would it work? Why would his vow work when he compares it to something that he wasn't involved in, or that no one's involved in? So manda asar bechar nami matvisa beneder. The one that says that it works says that a bechar you can also consecrate. Why? You can grab it in a vow. The Tanya, because it was taught in a brayso. Mishum Rebbe Yamro, in the name of Rebbe, they said, Minayin l'neilad bechar b'teich beis shemitzvah lachtishay. How do you know that if a firstborn animal is born, that it's a mitzvah to consecrate it, sanctify it? Shenemar hazachar takdish. Says the male you should sanctify. Manda shari. What? So then, if that's the case, then why is it? Is there an opinion here that says that it doesn't work by a firstborn? Other opinion says kilei makdish le milei mikdash. Look, you're supposed to sanctify it as well, but if you don't sanctify it, is it not holy on its own? It is holy on its own. It's sort of like Shabbos. Shabbos is holy whether we do anything or not, but at the same time we also make kiddush and we sanctify the Shabbos. So we add to the sanctity of Shabbos by doing whatever things we're supposed to do to sanctify Shabbos. Even if we don't, if we don't, it's Shabbos anyway. So the firstborn is a firstborn.
Do it after a month.
Yeah, that would be by a firstborn baby. We're talking about a firstborn animal. Firstborn animal is brought as a sacrifice. So whether you consecrate it or not, it's considered a firstborn. It's considered a sacrifice. The only thing is, Rebbe says that you're supposed to add to that sanctity by sanctifying it. You're supposed to pronounce this is a bechar, this is a firstborn animal. So if you're able to add to it, then that means that when you take a vow and you say that this loaf of bread should be like a firstborn, the firstborn is also something that he adds in, he participates in, and therefore it's going to be a good vow.
Animals, firstborn is males.
Only male, yeah.
I have a question. First of all, why'd you sit in that chair? Okay. Why do
You could
this
sit up.
is working out better? This last question you said with the bechor is an automatic. Why doesn't anyone mention we're Kadosh?
Right.
We're automatically Kadosh, and yet we have to make Kiddush
Right.
and do things
Right.
to Mekadesh and all those things. So why do we have to go to an animal to give an example of the Bechor? Why don't we just say, God, you made us Kaddish, just like we're Kaddish, but we still have an obligation to make things.
Right. So what's really happening here, The Bechor could be an example for a lot of things. What we chose this as an example. We got into this because we thought this would help us resolve, do you look at it as it is now or as it was originally? We said that's not the case. What we're really looking at is something that's inherently sanctified, but you can also add to its sanctity by pronouncing it sanctified. Is that something, can you take a vow?
Pronouncing the item itself.
No, you have to pronounce the Bechor that it's sanctified. And even though if you don't, it's going to be sanctified anyway.
I mean,
Yeah.
I would think you still would have to actually vocalize and sanctify it yourself, because if it happens anyway, it's like you're not.
Well, you should,
Yeah.
but never. Okay, so there's two steps to this.
gotta
I know
do
you
this.
should sanctify the Bechor. That's what Rebbe says, that you should add to its sanctity, but you should pronounce it sanctified. The question is that since if you didn't do anything, it would be sanctified as well. So now, when you take another item and you compare it to the Bechor, do we consider it that you're supposed to add to the sanctity of the Bechor, and it's considered that that's something you're matris and something that you're grasping onto something that you're involved in, and therefore there would be a real vow? Or do we say no, it was inherently sanctified? Because there are two parts to it. Yeah, I always had a question. There was a story with Rebbe Zushin and Rebbe Elimelech. Yeah, you know, on Shabbos they felt different on Shabbos. So they didn't know, is it because of Shabbos food and the way they dressed, or is it because they're actually feeling Shabbos, feeling the spiritual part of Shabbos? And they quoted a Gemara. The Gemara says that an animal that gores could be a muad l'shabbasis. Why? Because it recognizes the clothing that people wear, and it like feels differently on Shabbos, but obviously it doesn't feel Shabbos. It just sees the different clothing and the festivity, and it gets wild and it gores. So they wanted to know, are they just like the ox that sees the clothing? And so the only way to figure it out would be to celebrate Shabbos on a weekday and see if they felt the same thing. So they got everyone in the town to dress up, and they prepared a cholent, and they went to the mikvah on Wednesday afternoon.
And then they went to a bullfight.
And then Wednesday night they sang the songs, and obviously whatever halacha allows. And then Shabbos morning they went to shul with the children and everything, and they felt Shabbos. So they were very sad that obviously they weren't really feeling Shabbos the whole time. Really, it was just the cholent and the food. So they went to Maggid, and the Maggid told him, if Reb Zushin and Reb Elimelech go to the mikveh and they prepare for Shabbos, you don't think Shabbos is going to come? So that was the story. Anyway, I always had a question that's not how Shabbos works. Shabbos is mekadsha v'kaima. You don't do anything for Shabbos. Shabbos is on its own. But according to this Gemara, that's not how it works. It could be on its own, but you're supposed to add to it. Yeah.
That's why that clothing is a good example. Because the luck is you're supposed to wear big day Shabbos, even if you don't leave your house.
Uh-huh.
So you look down and you remember that the Shabbos by what you're wearing.
How do you apply that to the person that's lost in the desert that doesn't know Shabbos? And then the Idaho Shabbos every day or once a week, which may or may not be Shabbos.
Right. That was the question of that Gemara has to do with. Are we celebrating Hashem's Shabbos, or are we celebrating man's Shabbos? There was a machlekes Amirayim, Rafuna Breder, be sure. Does he count 6 days and then keep Shabbos, or does he keep Shabbos and count 6 days? That
Was
with
there
Shabbos.
I
don't remember the answer, but okay. I think this explains. I heard this actually from Rabbi Herschel Schachter makes a big deal about this Gemara. He says did it on the Shir and Brachas or something, but how did he wanted to explain why we say Zecher Yitzias Mitzrayim on Shabbos. Shabbos really doesn't have anything to do with Yitzias Mitzrayim. really the Ramban's question. And anyway, okay. Yeah, but when Hashem, Adam's first day first he celebrated Shabbos, because it was created on Friday, and then he had 6 days. But Hashem had 6 days, and then he had Shabbos. So that was the machlekes over there in Shabbos.
So they were from Eitz Hadas on the first day. He actually picked the fruit on Shabbos.
Okay, back to the Mishnah. One of the statements of the Mishnah was that if a person compares it to a lamb, or he compares, we're talking about he's taking a vow. He says this item should be like a lamb. She means the lamb that's going to be a sacrifice. Like wood, like fire, like the altar. All of those were terms that were referring to sacrifices, things that were brought on the altar. So Gemara now says, Ki imra kidirim. He says, like a lamb, like the pen which holds the animals. Tana, the Brisa teaches, imra, li imra, ki imra. There's 3 options of how to say this. Depends on what he wants to put as the prefix. It could be plain, imra. This food is a lamb. What does that mean? Well, what he means to say is that it's like a lamb. That's what he means to say. He didn't say that it's like a lamb, but that's good enough. Or he says this food is for a lamb, which means as if. Or he says ki imra, it's like the lamb. Ki would be the most obvious, easy to explain, but the other ones could work also. Dirim, lidirim, kidirim. The same thing if he does that with a pen. This is a pen. This is for a pen. This is like a pen. 8 pen as in a stall. Corral. With that me? Second.
The crowd loves it. So they assume that everyone who says the word lamb means carbon tamid.
Right, a carbon. Now there was a discussion if it means a carbon tamid, but that's what we're taking it as, something like that.
So lamb only is used for carbon tamid?
And other sacrifices as well.
But all carbon tamid
Have to
With
be
a
a
lamb.
have to be a lamb.
Okay.
In all lamb chops.
I don't remember. We have to check that up in Shabbos.
So all of these are good. Is this what the mission?
All of these are good.
Brisa
So
is
far,
saying?
all of these are good. We're going to see that there's a machlekes about this, but the Brisa says yes. Ishim li ishim ke ishim, fire like fire, for fire like fire. Mizbeach li mizbeach ke mizbeach. It is the altar. It's for the altar. It's like the altar. Heichal leheichal keichal. It's for the sanctuary. It is the sanctuary. It's for the sanctuary. It's like the sanctuary. Yerushalayim, 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 Kulam Shaichala. If he adds on to this, and he says that I eat from you, or that I eat this. This is like a sanctuary that I eat this. This food that I eat is like the sanctuary. Now that would be a way of taking the vow. It's prohibited just like the items that are brought to the sanctuary, which are sacrifices or other things. Well, in the sanctuary itself, you don't really bring that, but you could bring the blood of the sacrifice or something. That's going to be usher. That's going to be a real vow. Let's say he says it's the sanctuary, or it's like an animal or a lamb, that I don't eat from it. Then that's going to be mutter. That's going to be permissible.
So the other food that he consecrates, like the lamb, for example, the Kohanim would eat from it, like say gives a donut or something, consecrates a donut
Right.
like the lamb. So
Right, maybe something like that. Well, man shamat le shani le imra shani le imra li imra ki imra. Who's the opinion that holds that it doesn't matter what prefix preposition he adds to the word lamb, to the lamb, for the lamb, for a lamb, something. Who says that it doesn't matter what he does to that? Well, that's Reb Meir. That's Reb Meir that holds that. And a Maseifa, if that's the case, that it's Reb Meir, Kulan lo yoichalach mutter. Says, if he says that I don't eat from it, a lamb, if the word kulan is not in there. What it says is imra le imra ki imra. Oh, it is in there. Kulan, but kulan is in there. Kulan shaichalach is there. Lo yoichalach. It doesn't say kulan lo yoichalach, but it's the kulan that it said on the previous phrase is being used for this phrase as well. That whatever he says, if he ends off saying that I don't eat it, this is a sanctuary that I don't eat this, or what I don't eat, that's going to be mutter. The only problem is that if we say that it's Reb Meir, Vatanan, we have the Mishnah that says, La karban la yoichalach, for a sacrifice, what I don't eat from you, Reb Meir Eiser. Reb Meir says that it's prohibited. What does it mean for a sacrifice that I don't eat from you? Well, let's take a look a little further. What he really means to say, Rabab explains Reb Meir, that what this person means to say is that it should be a sacrifice. We had this yesterday. And therefore, we throw the word therefore in, and therefore I won't eat it. That's the case. Why when he says for a sacrifice, what I don't eat, is that considered a vow? If he says for a lamb, what I don't eat, it's not a vow. If it's Reb Meir, it should be a vow. Same thing, sacrifice, lamb, same thing. So the Gemara says, the Gemara answers like kasha. Ada amar loy, ada amar, I think I have to take out the base. Yeah, take out the loy. Ada amar loy imra, no, you take out the lam. Ada amar lit imra. You have it lit imra? No, I followed. I'm not going to change it. I followed the Ran's Gersa. The Ran's Gersa went like this: Hada amar li imra, hada amar la imra. Okay.
The Ran has a different version.
Yeah. You see, that's one of the interesting things, that when you follow the commentaries, especially the way they quote, a lot of times the differences in opinion of how it works is because they actually had a different manuscript that quotes it slightly different, that could affect
That affects the
commentary. Yeah. Sometimes they'll actually adjust the text. I know it says this, but it can't be, it must be that it's a mistake. You have to adjust it to make it fit with the commentary that they want to say. Yeah. So what's going on now is that Reb Meir is of the view that if he says what I don't eat is not a sacrifice. What does that imply? What I don't eat is not like a sacrifice. That would imply that what I do eat is like a sacrifice. So that should be a vow. But Reb Meir's view was that we don't say mechlal avat shemeahein. We don't say that we can imply the positive out of a negative. So we don't know what he meant. All we know is he meant is that what I don't eat is not a vow. What else did he mean? What you do eat is a vow. I don't know. Reb Meir doesn't take it to that next step, that what you do eat is a vow. So if he says Lay imra, lay eichalach, then we would say that you're trying to get out of the negative a positive. What I don't eat is not a vow. You're trying, and Reb Meir doesn't hold of that, and that's why it says that it's not a vow. But if he says li imra as a sacrifice, what I don't eat, then we throw the word therefore as a sacrifice. Therefore, I don't eat. Then we throw that word in, and then that will work. If it's that double negative, then it doesn't work. And if it's just the one negative, then we'll say, therefore, he won't eat.
You have to be very specific according to Reb Meir.
Yeah. You have to spell it out, or you say it in this way, and then they'll.
But he won't leap to the converse of the positive.
Right.
Because you're being specific, I guess, therefore.
Yeah, even though he didn't say the word therefore, but we're explaining it with the word therefore.
He wrote that you can do the opposite, from a negative to a positive.
Right. Okay, we have a new Mishnah. Ta'imer karban oila mincha chatas teida shlamim shani yoichala chaser. He uses one of the sacrifices as the comparison to why this to what this food should be like. So he says a elevation offering, a mincha offering, a chatas, a sin offering, a thanksgiving offering, a peace offering that I eat from you. It means if I eat from you, it should be. I'm not going to eat from you because it's going to be like a sacrifice to me. That's a way of taking a vow. So it's prohibited. Rabbi Yehuda Matar, Rabbi Yehuda says that's perfectly permissible. And now the explanation for this is Rabbi Yehuda holds that he didn't say kik karban, like a karban. He only said a sacrifice. He didn't add that the word like before it. In Hebrew, it's just the prefix chaf. Yeah, the chaf before a word, it becomes like. Yeah.
What word? Share.
Well,
Not here.
kisha,
But
kisha is when. Shin is the when, right?
I don't know. It just came in my mind like everything. Whatever, skip that.
Okay. So apparently the shin, the prefix shin, which we find in Mishnayos and Gemara, all of that, apparently it doesn't have any, it's not in the biblical Hebrew. There's no asher prefix shin in the, and then, but if you look at Rashi, sometimes there is. But so Rashi sometimes explains.
There's no shed biblical.
That's what I read. That's in, it's only in Mishnayos Hebrew. Okay. We're in the middle of the Mishnah. Ha karban, kik karban, karban, shaykhalach. The sacrifice, like a sacrifice, or sacrifice that I eat from you, that's aser. Lik karban, lo yaichalach. That was the quote that we quoted before that Reb Meir says. It's lik karban. How did we say it before? Yeah. Lik karban, to a sacrifice, or for a sacrifice that I don't eat from you. Reb Meir says that that's prohibited because we throw the word therefore in, right? Remember from Rabba. Therefore, I don't eat from you. Okay.
What did you say about Rabbi Yehuda and
Rabbi Yehuda holds that if you don't have the kaf there, then it's not considered a vow. He's expressed it with the word Yerushalayim in the last Mishnah. If you just say Yerushalayim, then you didn't say anything. You have to say ki Yerushalayim, like Yerushalayim.
over here? This page.
Over here,
It says Kubakor Rabbi Yehuda Matar.
yeah. Now, that was Rabbi Yehuda Matar by the Bechar. That we explained was because he holds that the Bechar is holy without you saying anything, and that was the wrong item. Yeah. Not because of the language. Katani was taught karban, ha-karban, kik-karban, shaykhalach aser. We went in the Mishnah, that you have those options of saying the word sacrifice, the sacrifice, like the sacrifice, for the sacrifice, to the sacrifice, as a sacrifice. So then all of those work. Stomach Reb Meir. It must be Reb Meir. He doesn't say make a difference between if he says lamb or like a lamb or for a lamb. Now, Reb Meir, the only problem is diktani ha diktani. This that it says ha karban sheichalach aser. The sacrifice that I eat from you is prohibited. But we have a brayso maidim chacham Rabbi Yehuda. The sages admit to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was the other view here. And the sages here would mean Reb Meir. Reb Meir agrees to Rabbi Yehuda. Va'omer ha karban v'ha oila v'ha minchas v'chata sheichalach shemuter. If he says this sacrifice, this oila, this mincha, this chatas that I eat from you, not considered a vow. Why? Because we say that he was trying to take an oath by the life of the sacrifice. So this sacrifice, like you would say, by the life of, you had to take an oath in the olden days, say, by the life of the king or by the life of Hashem lahato, right? He would say that would be an oath, but here he says by the life of the sacrifice. He didn't actually say by the life of it, he just said the sacrifice. Or Ha karban, this sacrifice. So we say that's not a real vow.
How can you make an oath by the life of the sacrifice? Before it's sacrificed, it's not a sacrifice. After sacrifice, it has no life.
Right.
So that's oxymoron by the life of the sacrifice. That's-
Maybe it means that it's designated as a sacrifice.
Like a bachor.
Yeah, well, it's designated before it's actually slaughtered. The Gemara says like kasha, hadamar ha karban, v'hadamar ha karban. If he says this sacrifice, if he says ha karban, the sacrifice, then that's a vow. But if he says this sacrifice, ha means this, then he means to say by the life of the sacrifice, and then that's not a vow. Ha means the, ha is just the article, definite article, right? Ha.
aha moment.
Right. Okay. My timer. What's the reason for this? Chayi carbon kamar. The reason why it doesn't work is because he's trying to make a vow by the life of the sacrifice, and that's not how you make a vow. There's in other versions here where it's high instead of ha. Katani, it was taught lekarban layich lachrameir. We're going back to the Mishnah. It says that for a sacrifice that I don't eat from you, Rameir says that works. Why are you telling me that that works? What that would mean is that we think that it means la karban. It's not a sacrifice, but I don't eat from you. We think the lamed is a no, negative. What I don't eat from you is not a sacrifice, which means what I do eat from you is a sacrifice, which means that it should be a vow. The problem is that Reb Meir doesn't hold that we can derive from a positive out of the negative. For Rabbi Yehuda, that would work. So we say now what we've been quoting the whole time. We're not changing the lamed into a negative. Lakarban, it's for a sacrifice. Which means like as a sacrifice, what I don't eat from you, which really means therefore I don't eat from you. There, it's as a sacrifice, therefore I don't eat, which we said but Rameir would accept. You can throw the word therefore in. Okay. I have a new Mishnah. My mouth that speaks with you is like a sacrifice. My hands that work with you is like a sacrifice. My feet that walk along with you is like a sacrifice. It basically means he's saying that he's not going to speak to him. He's not going to do work with him. He's not going to walk with him. I just heard yesterday one of the students about the student in camp that he was very upset with his counselor. So he said he's put his counselor in chayrim. He's not talking to the counselor. And in order to enforce it, to make sure that it really happens, he told all his friends, he says, if anyone sees me talking to the counselor, I'll give you $10. So that was like to make sure that he never violates that. You know.
Yes, the student's very broke.
It's a father's credit card. I'm kidding. Okay, so Veramino. 1 second, we have a contradiction. It says Chaymer b'shvua mi nedarim, b'nedarim mi b'shvua. An oath is more stringent than a vow, and also a vow is more stringent than an oath. Depends on regarding what. So Chaymer b'nedarim, what's strict about the vow? Shanadarim chalam ala mitzvah kibershus mashenkim b'shvua. So this is interesting. A person can't take a vow that he's going to do a mitzvah because he was obligated to do the mitzvah. He can't vow that he's going to put on tefillin. He was supposed to have to put on tefillin anyway. We said that it could be the negative also, actually. Does it say over there that we're talking about a negative?
No, that's just what I thought,
of course. We did say that he could take a vow that he's going to wake up in the morning and study, And because we said that he didn't really need to do that, he could have gotten out of it by just reciting Shema. So that would be an effective vow. But if it's actually the mitzvah, or if he takes a vow against that he's not going to do the mitzvah, then that doesn't work because he already vowed that he will do the mitzvah.
By vow, are you referring?
I'm
to
sorry,
another
oath. Can't take an oath, a shvua. Okay. On the other hand, when it comes to a vow, which is a neder, then he can say that he's forbidding the matzah on him like a sacrifice. Now, even though he's obligated to eat it, well, the neder is going to end up being negative because it's hard to get that into a positive. But what really the neder is, the big difference is that the neder is on the object, and the shvua, the vow is on the object. This object is forbidden. The shvua, the oath, is on the person. I will or I will not. Yeah. We said that, but that would be for something that he didn't really have to do.
We use the same explanation to distinguish neder and nadava. The nadava was on the object and the neder was on the person.
That's also true.
There's a difference in making them that in Shavuot you use Hashem's name and in a neder you don't need to.
That could also be, but that's not the big difference over here. The Rabbanan, I think we said you don't use Hashem's name. Okay. Now, Chaymer b'shvua. What's strict about more about us about an oath? An oath can take effect on something that's not physically here, that's not tangible. However, mashenkim nedarim, but a neder can only take effect on something that's tangible. This loaf of bread is forbidden like a sacrifice. That would be, you have to have the loaf of bread. You can't say my speech is like a sacrifice because that's not tangible. So the problem now is, how could he say that my speech is like a sacrifice? It's not tangible, it doesn't work. He's not saying my speech, he's saying my mouth to speak is like a sacrifice. So he's associating his mouth with the sacrifice, not his speech. My hands to their work, my feet, ragli leiluchun. See, it says my mouth that speaks with you. It doesn't say that I speak with you. I think we could leave it here. We'll leave it at the new paragraph. Okay.
Oh, wow.
Finish the chapter.
Right.